Hello, my name is Stephen Elser. I'm a PhD candidate at Arizona State University. Thanks so much for watching my talk. Today, I'll be talking to you about the future, or more specifically, positive visions of the future from 9 cities across the United States and Latin America, and what those visions mean for the future of ecosystem services provided by nature in cities. So nature in cities takes on many forms, from a lone tree that you might see walking to a bus station in Phoenix on the left, to extensive urban wetlands that you might see right from your backyard that you see on the right-hand side if you lived in Valdivia, Chile. And of course, there are parks, community gardens, river walks, and a plethora of other examples of nature in cities. And there are also many terms to describe nature in cities. One term that I like is urban ecological infrastructure, or UEI. That's an inclusive term, and it's defined as all parts of a city that include ecological structures and functions. So it exists along a spectrum where on this left side over here, you have things that are entirely ecological, but then as you move further to the right, it incorporates more and more built, engineered features. Importantly, UEI is broken down into 4 different color categories: brown, green, turquoise, and blue. And through this breakdown, the UEI framework explicitly includes a wide diversity of ecological infrastructure types. So brown includes things like vacant lots, green includes things like green roofs, blue includes things like lakes and canals, and turquoise, the color that happens when you mix green and blue, includes various forms of wetlands. And another important distinction is that each UEI color tends to provide different benefits. So by focusing on just one color, you'll probably get a limited range of benefits. These benefits that people get from ecological features like UEI are called ecosystem services. The 4 categories of ecosystem services, as defined by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, are provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting. Provisioning services refer to more tangible goods and benefits that we get from nature, things like a piece of fruit that you would eat or wood as a fuel source. Regulating refers to things like water and air purification or the regulation of stormwater runoff. Cultural refers to things like spiritual or recreational benefits. Meanwhile, supporting services are just sort of the background processes that allow for these other services to exist. And all services influence human well-being one way or another. So why does this all matter? Well, most people now live in cities. We are heavily dependent on the function of ecosystems for current and future human well-being. And as more people move to cities, we'll need more UEI in order to maintain a desired level of ecosystem services. And with wicked problems like climate change looming down on us, municipalities across the world are turning towards UEI as a strategy to prepare because of its multifunctionality, flexibility, and ability to provide a wide range of benefits. So, thinking about the future of cities and climate change and the strategies that cities are employing to prepare leads me to my research question. How do cities differ in the degree to which they incorporate UEI and ecosystem services into their future visions? To answer this question, I'll be analyzing output from scenario workshops in 9 cities across the United States and Latin America. These cities are quite distinct from one another, as you can see just by looking at them, but they also share some similarities. So some are in the same biome, some have similar cultural values, some are in the same region or even state, and they all experience extreme weather and will experience worse extremes in the future because of climate change. So all these cities are also part of the Urban Resilience to Extremes Sustainability Research Network, which is a network that brings together diverse groups of scientists, engineers, social scientists, ecologists like myself, with local practitioners to co-produce knowledge and strategies for dealing with extreme weather events of the future brought on by climate change. So one of the most important parts of this co-production process is the scenario workshop. So what is a scenario? A scenario is just a plausible and coherent narrative about the future of a place or situation. And so the scenarios that we produce in the URXSRN are participatory. So we invite local stakeholders and community members to participate in envisioning what their city will look like in the year 2080, given a few prompts. So this is the general breakdown of what happens in our scenario workshops. And while they're there, we really encourage the participants to think transformatively. Not only do we want them to think about what could cities look like in 2080, but what should they look like? We really want them to think about equity as they think about their cities in the future. And this starts by exploring what the past, present, and future trends in climate and the climate of the city are like. And then based on the theme of table in which they are assigned, they have to come up with goals and challenges for 2080. And then once they've done that, they come up with specific strategies to achieve those goals or address those challenges. And then they add more specificity through timelines and maps. And eventually they actually form an entire narrative about a person living their typical day in the year 2080. So I will be focusing in on this third step, the strategies part. That's what I'll primarily be analyzing. So as I mentioned before, there are multiple scenarios in each city, and each scenario had a different theme. And so this slide is just sort of meant to highlight to you the number of scenarios that I analyzed in each city, that's in yellow, and then a couple of examples of what those scenarios themes were like. So some were focused on issues of equity, some were focused on environmental issues, and about half were focused explicitly on extreme weather events, flood, heat, drought, or some combination of the three. In total, I analyzed 45 different scenarios. So we used a binary coding process for the UEI and ecosystem services that were explicitly mentioned in each strategy. Our coders had a very high level of agreement. And then using various methods compared across cities and scenarios, and this included the use of k-means clustering to determine patterns of UEI and ecosystem service bundles and trade-offs. Before I get into results, I just want to break down the coding process a little bit more so you can better understand what the data look like. So this is an example strategy, wetlands used to treat water and phosphorus. So in this case, we would read it and we would see, okay, well, wetlands are an urban ecological infrastructure feature. So we would sort of check that box and mark that as a 1. And then we'd see that it says treat water, which is another way of saying purify water, which is an ecosystem service. So we'd code that particular service as a 1 and go on from there. In this next example, the only thing that we would code here is green infrastructure. So that's an urban ecological infrastructure feature, but there is no ecosystem service explicitly mentioned in the wording of the strategy. So this is actually really common for there to be a UEI strategy, but no ecosystem service attached, and I'll get more into that later. And then finally, here's another example where cooling stations / increased water filling and heat release stations throughout the neighborhood. There's no explicit UEI. While it's possible that the cooling station might incorporate ecological elements, it's not clear in the wording of the strategy, so we'd code this UEI as 0, and there aren't any ecosystem services, so all services then are coded as 0. So we did that for every strategy from all 45 scenarios, and so I'll get into those results, and first I just want to show you some general patterns to give you an idea of what the data are like. So first I wanted to compare whether there were differences in the percent of strategies that incorporated UEI across all cities. And I found that there were no statistical differences between the cities, but as you can see that in general, between 20 and 35% of the strategies incorporated urban ecological infrastructure. In some cities a little bit lower, in some cities a little bit higher, but UEI is quite common in these strategies, and that's true pretty much across all cities. Next up, I wanted to see whether there were patterns with the ecosystem services across cities. So this is on the y-axis, you'll see the average number of ecosystem services for each city. And again, no statistical differences between the cities. But what I want to point out here is that there are a pretty small number of ecosystem services mentioned. On average, fewer than 10 ecosystem services were mentioned in each scenario across the cities. So while UEI was common, it was also very, very common for there to be no particular ecosystem service mentioned in a UEI strategy. So with these general trends across the cities out of the way, I started to think about the trends that you might see across different scenario types. And as I showed earlier, about half of these scenarios were focused on extreme weather events. So I was curious whether this had any effect on the type of ecosystem services that they desired. And sure enough, we observed some differences. So these box plots just compare the percent of total services that are either provisioning on the left or regulating on the right. and in each scenario focused on extremes in blue or scenarios focused on other things in red. So we see that there were a significant higher percentage of provisioning services in scenarios not focused on extreme weather events. And on the flip side, we see that scenarios focused on extremes has significantly higher percentage of regulating services. And this makes a lot of sense. Remember that regulating services include things like stormwater regulation and microclimate regulation, sorts of benefits that directly link to coping with extreme weather events like flood and heat. So after seeing this, I was curious whether there were patterns in the types of UEI and ecosystem services that scenarios employed in their strategies, and whether certain UEI and ecosystem services tend to be bundled together, and if so, what sort of trade-offs might that entail? So to do this, I employed k-means clustering, which is an unsupervised machine learning algorithm that basically links data, that basically tries to group data points together in clusters so as to minimize the amount of variance in each cluster. So that's what I did, and that's sort of what this shows. So this is a biplot where each scenario is represented by a point on the plot, and the distance between the points conveys how dissimilar each point is from each other. So the further they are, the more dissimilar they are. And as you can see, some clusters have much more variance than others, and that's just what happens sometimes depending on what your data look like. This is the most optimal number of clusters though, according to the elbow method. So next I'll just show you how each UEI cluster varied from each other. So here I'm going to show the differences between the clusters using flower diagrams. Basically each wedge or petal in the diagram represents how much of a particular UEI color was present in the cluster. So larger petals mean more of that UEI color. So scenarios in cluster 1 had turquoise UEI as the most popular, followed by moderate amounts of green and blue UEI. Scenarios in cluster 2 had entirely green UEI strategies, literally all green all the time. Scenarios in cluster 3 had a vast majority of green UEI strategies with a small amount of blue, and scenarios in cluster 4 had a balance of moderate amounts of green and blue UEI. So what does this show us? This shows us that green UEI is overwhelmingly the most popular. That's obvious both from the size of the petals in that green, and then also just the number of scenarios in each cluster where green is dominant. So you can see 16 for cluster 3 and 16 for cluster 2 compared to just 8 and 5 for clusters 1 and 4. So I did the same thing then with ecosystem services to see if there were patterns there, and found 3 different clusters, A, B, and C. So did the same sort of k-means clustering as before, and sort of same sort of flower diagrams again. So here we can see that scenarios in cluster A focus predominantly on regulating ecosystem services. Scenarios in cluster B focus predominantly on provisioning ecosystem services. And then scenarios in cluster C had moderate amounts of cultural and supporting ecosystem services. So what does this all tell us? This shows that the participants in our scenarios did not do a very good job of seeking out a diversity of ecosystem service types. So none of these clusters are particularly balanced. They're very clear ecosystem service trade-offs. So after seeing all this, I was curious whether there were patterns about how these clusters were distributed across the cities. So to do this, I used chi-square to test if there was a relationship between the clusters and the cities. And sure enough, there was a relationship between the UEI cluster numbers and the city, but no relationship between ecosystem service clusters and cities. So this table basically shows you how the different UEI clusters were spread out across the 9 cities. Bigger circles mean that more scenarios of that cluster were present in the city. So the major patterns that I see here, first is that the 2 more balanced UEI clusters, 1 and 4, were not spread out that much. Scenarios in cluster 1 were only found in 5 cities, and scenarios from cluster 4 were only found in 3 cities. So combined, that leaves 3 cities with no scenarios with more balanced UEI clusters. In contrast, scenarios from clusters 2 and 3 that focus predominantly on green UEI were spread out in high numbers across all cities. So the scenarios from one city, for example, Portland, only include green UEI strategies, no other UEI colors at all. So why the green focus? Well, part of this might have to do with the sorts of terms that we use. Green infrastructure is an extremely popular term with both scientists and practitioners, and you see it covered a lot in news articles. And there are a lot of green infrastructure painters. So these images just basically show you a couple of headlines and search results from searching the term green infrastructure for just like the last 2 weeks. So the problem is, though, that green infrastructure tends to be narrowly focused on terrestrial vegetated solutions. Another reason why we might see so much green is that the scale of different UEI features is different. So green UEI strategies included things like trees or bioswales, which are fairly small, whereas turquoise strategies would be entire wetlands, or blue strategies would be a whole river. So obviously a couple of trees and a few bioswales are much, much smaller than wetlands or a river. So maybe you just need more green UEI to measure up just in physical space to the sorts of UEI features that happen to be blue or turquoise. So some conclusions. So UEI is a common strategy to achieve positive future visions across all the cities that we analyzed. And this suggests that UEI will continue to be implemented and maintained in the future. The desired UEI types are heavily green, though, and while green UEI is diverse and can do a lot, it is limited. There are many ecosystem services that cannot adequately be provided by green UEI alone, and a more diverse set of UEI features is needed. And participants frequently were not explicit with what ecosystem services they wanted from various UEI features, and when they were explicit, they typically did not mention multiple different types of service. So UEI is a popular strategy in part because of its supposed multifunctionality. And while it's true that UEI does do multiple things, in terms of services that participants actually wanted, that functionality isn't very obvious. Co-benefits seem to be an afterthought. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much to members of the GRIM Lab for their help and comments during lab meetings. Thanks so much to various colleagues and collaborators that have been instrumental in helping me form some of my questions and methods and providing other means of support. And a huge, huge thanks to Finley Rickman and Matt Miato, the 2 undergrads that I've been working with this past summer to code all of the strategies from these scenarios. They're both so smart and hardworking and are interested in grad school. So if you are a PI or know of opportunities for incoming graduate students, please consider them. They're excellent. Finley is also a SEEDS fellow, so if you're a member of ESA, be on the lookout for her presentation at next year's annual meeting. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have questions or suggestions. I just learned a lot of the analytical methods that I use for this presentation, so I'd love to learn more about how to better handle and analyze the data that I've shared. I also co-host a science podcast about issues relating to urban resilience, so scan the QR code below to check it out. There are more than 30 episodes covering issues like urban ecology, design, gentrification, and more. And also, I'll be finishing my PhD in either spring or summer of 2021, so I'm looking for a job. I'm most interested in working at the nexus of science and decision-making, and I would love a career in science policy or communication, either in the government, an NGO, or even industry. I'm happy to send along a CV and set up a time to meet if you want to talk about employment possibilities. So thanks again so much for watching. I'll see you around.